Welcome to Back from the Abyss. I'm Dr. Craig Heacock. One of the best parts of making Back from the Abyss is that I get to continually learn and even challenge my assumptions and beliefs. I get to choose the stories and topics that most call to me. A few months ago, I got an email from a listener named Jade Miller, and she offered to share her story of DID, or Dissociative Identity Disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder. Now, I have to admit, one part of me, an unnamed part, not an alter, this part was very fascinated and deeply curious about this. And another part of me, still Craig, was more than a little skeptical. As the mental health professionals in the audience know, DID is a hot button and controversial diagnosis. Now, I think basically everyone in psychiatry agrees that dissociation in a traumatic context can lead to periods of profound amnesia. But the idea that these periods of dissociative amnesia can morph into discrete personalities or alters, this is where the heat of the argument lies. Prior to recording this, I had long believed that discrete alters or personalities were largely, or perhaps entirely, an unconscious co-creation of well-meaning therapists and their traumatized and easily dissociated trauma patients. In my large practice with many patients with complex PTSD, I'm not aware of a single patient with alters. But after meeting Jade, I'm wondering how much I might be missing. Because after all, can we actually see what we aren't looking for? Maybe the apparent lack of DID in my patients is a co-creation fueled by an unspoken lack of safety for these parts to emerge. My patients can read me just as well as I read them. On a deep energetic level, they know where they can go and not go with me. This episode has made me begin to more critically look at some of my prior assumptions about DID, and more generally, what kinds of things might not be showing up in my office because of who I am and or what I believe. Jade Miller is a peer support specialist for DID, a writer, and an advocate for public education about DID. In the first part of this episode, Jade shares her story and how she came to understand that the puzzling gaps and often frightening incongruities in her life were caused by her rotating through a number of dissociated identities or alters, which were initially protecting her, but eventually led her to be powerless to stop the repeated traumatization. Later in the episode, we transitioned to talk shop about DID. I learned a lot from Jade. She's eloquent and impassioned, and really just a compassionate and mindful voice for better treatment of DID. One note about Jade's story. As she and I began to explore how she might tell her story, we were confronted with the same issue that other Back from the Abyss storytellers have faced. How do you tell a chronological story with huge missing pieces, which only begin to come into some focus years or even decades later? It might be something like bringing together a group of writers with diverse backgrounds who then are trying to collaborate on an autobiography. In any case, I think Jade does a lovely job negotiating this integration challenge.
Well, 11 is when I first entered the mental health system. I had a lot of struggles with my mental health, but there was not really an identifiable cause at the time. I'm not even sure that I had the awareness to articulate what was going on, but I was hospitalized for the first time at around age 11 for suicidal ideation and self-harm. If anyone had asked me at the time why I was so sad, why I was so anxious, I don't know that I could have told them. Interestingly, they didn't ask if anyone had abused me at that point. I got my records at one point and looked through them, everyone that I could remember. Not a single person ever asked me if I had been abused. At least not that they noted, and I'm assuming they would have noted it. So I think that's very interesting. A lot of people took more notes on my parents than they did even on me.
How many years ago was this?
This would have been about 33 years ago.
Yeah, I wonder if that might have to do something with, trauma is so in the zeitgeist right now, and 30 years ago, people barely talked about it.
Yeah. I thought it was very unfortunate that no one asked me. But at 11, I don't know that I even could have articulated. I had a lot of repressed memories until my early 20s. And at 11, I had a lot of attachment trauma, I think, was probably more what was going on. I didn't really have a secure attachment to either one of my parents for very different reasons for each parent. I was looking, as most people do, for some sort of attachment to someone. And I think because friendships can be so unstable at that age, and, friendships with girls can be very tricky and complicated anyway. So there was a lot going on in my friend group. So I think that affected me a lot, but I don't know that I could have really explained it to anyone. I had a lot of therapy as a tween and teen, but because I didn't want to be there and didn't really know why I was there, I don't think it was very helpful because nobody really knew what was wrong or what to work on. And because my parents made me go, I wasn't super cooperative. I'm sure that's hard to imagine, but I didn't know what to talk about because the thing that mattered to me at the time was, pretty normal 11-year-old girl stuff. It wasn't really like, oh, let's talk about our feelings and how we see ourselves. And I don't know that I had the capacity to do that at that age. I don't know if most people do, but I did not. At 18, I was able to choose not to go to therapy, so I chose not to. But I spiraled pretty quickly at 18 because the depression never really went away. And I tried a lot of psychiatric meds. I remember trying Zoloft and Paxil and whatever was trending at the time. And despite it taking 8 weeks to even know if it was going to do anything, I never really felt like it helped. I think even at that age, I went, I'll take a medication if it makes me feel happier, but no one's really doing anything about the situation. So I wasn't necessarily expecting it to help. On some level, I went, you're not addressing the actual problem. So,
yeah. But what were they seeing? Why were your parents sending you to therapy at age 11 to 17?
At 11, I tried to commit suicide. I had passed a note to a friend that was intercepted by a teacher, and the teacher called my parents. And so I was sent to an inpatient psychiatric facility. I did see a therapist outside of there for a while, but I don't know that I really could have told them, I could have just been so angry. And I say I could have because a different person actually lived the first 30 some years of my life. I would call myself a guardian in my system, and I came to the front in my late 20s, early 30s to help with what was going on at that point. A lot of the memories that I have from childhood are sort of inherited, so they're secondhand memories in some way. I can guess to some extent as to what was going on at that time.
It's so interesting. They feel secondhand.
Yeah. I can see pictures of some of the things that happened and where I was and who was there. They don't feel like genuinely my memories. It feels like if you were looking in the window to all of these things that are happening. So in my 20s, I really had a hard time. I also had an eating disorder by 16. So that was why my parents were sending me to therapy. I also went to an inpatient treatment center where I would go into dissociative trances, and they didn't know what to do with it. And they also never talked to me about it. So whenever I would dissociate...
they knew what it was?
I think they did. I think they felt like they needed to stay in their lane, maybe. So they would just if they really couldn't talk me back from wherever I'd gone, they would just break out the ammonia and put it under my nose, and that would always snap me out of it. And they just put me in the observation room.
Whoa.
No one ever pulled me aside and was like, do you know what happens when when you get stuck like that?
So they would use ammonia to snap you out of dissociation.
Yeah. They would
as if you were a football player with a head injury. Wow.
Yeah. They would just break open the little ammonia packet and put it under my nose.
Wow.
It wasn't fun.
No. And not exactly therapeutic.
No, not really. And even one of the patients that I had become friends with talked to me more about it than any of the staff or my therapist. She said, I don't like it when you go away. Where do you go? A lot of therapeutic treatment and therapeutic hospitalizations, but no one really seemed to be able to pinpoint okay, this is the problem and this is what we're going to work on. So I think, some of it was the environment that I grew up in, which was very dysfunctional. My dad was very emotionally distant. My mom was super invasive. I don't like saying that she's a narcissist because I'm not really qualified, but she had a lot of narcissistic traits. Once I became old enough to have opinions that were different than hers, she really didn't enjoy me very much anymore.
You're not serving me.
Yes. So she was pretty good with me and my brother when we were little, but not really when we got older and we're trying to assert our independence and become our own person. She's not okay with that. So I think the environment that I came from, not having a secure attachment and not having people to help me understand who I was and what's a healthy relationship, all of that. And then there was abuse going on, but I didn't remember it until a decade or so later.
And the not remembering had to do with, there was a part of you that was there experiencing that, which is not necessarily the part that I'm talking to at the moment.
Yes. So, I mean, my understanding of dissociation for me was just, if something is so overwhelming to your nervous system that you don't have the ability to handle it, you will pass it off to a different part of yourself that I guess can handle it. It's interesting to me because I've thought a lot about how, if a part of your mind is able to handle it, then it seems like you would be able to handle it, but it doesn't seem to work that way in real life. So there was abuse in my history. I just didn't remember until I was probably 23, I think. So I went through it was a religion-based recovery center, and actually did make a little bit of progress there. But again, no one really knew what they were supposed to be doing with me. They knew I had eating disorder history. They knew I had depression, self-harm, suicidality. There was no cause that they could figure out. Once I graduated from that program, then I started having all these visions. And that's what I thought of them as at the time because I didn't know what they were. I thought I've got some kind of psychosis because a normal person wouldn't make these things up, but I don't know what they are.
Yeah.
And
were they flashbacks?
Yeah, they were actually flashbacks, but they were so bizarre in nature that I was like, I don't understand what's happening, and I guess I must just be losing my mind. But the flashbacks, they did end up showing some context that I recognized eventually. It just took a while. So at my early 20s, I had just graduated from another recovery program. Everybody's celebrating, yay, you recovered. And then about 6 months later, I start having all these flashbacks. And I feel like I'm right back where I started. Although now I have sort of a reason if I can figure out what these visions are. And they were very intense abuse memories. I believe that a family member was involved, but I don't know. That family member passed away when I was a teenager. And I mean, I don't know that I could talk to them anyway about it, but I believe that a family member was perpetrating the abuse. And up until the age of 5, I actually lived about a block away from them. So from infancy to age 5, they had pretty much any access to me that they wanted. My mom really didn't want a second baby, especially not as soon. So I was kind of the unwelcome permanent guest, and she did let a lot of people babysit and, take me, and care for me. This family member would have had ability to abuse me. So it is plausible. Some of the situations that I would have flashbacks about, I couldn't understand because it had more of an organized abuse feel to it. There were other people there. There was a certain context, there was a specific place that I remembered. With those visions in mind, I thought maybe I'm just losing my mind. So I started looking around for someone who could help me, either help me figure out how to make them go away if they're not supposed to be happening, or help me figure out what to do with them because I don't understand. I wasn't really opposed to therapy at that point, but I was probably 21 and had my first job and, couldn't really afford therapy on that and, my single income. And I had been raised in Christianity. The people at the religious recovery center gave me a phone number to call this different place because they couldn't work with me again. I had already graduated. It was very hush hush. We've already fixed you. So don't make yourself known here, but here's a number. You call this number and maybe they can help you.
But it was at that recovery place where the flashback started.
It did not start in the inpatient. Mm-hmm. It didn't start in the Christian recovery center. It started after. Mm-hmm. So I was living on my own in an apartment.
Any thoughts why then? All these years of sealing those away and, repressing them, compartmentalizing them, putting them with a different part of you, but then why did they start to appear? I mean, do you have any theories on that?
I just wonder if it was the first time I had ever lived alone and had as much autonomy as I had then. It probably was the safest I felt at that point because no one could really bother me or make me do anything I didn't want to do at that point. So I think it was probably just the most safety I'd ever experienced.
Isn't that so interesting that in a time where you felt the safest, the scariest stuff could finally come up? I mean, it makes sense also, but it's just an interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, and it makes sense to talk about it logically, but when you're experiencing it, it's like, oh, I've done all this work on whatever we think is the problem, and everyone says I'm better, and I think I'm better, and now I'm clearly not better at all. Yeah, now I'm actually worse.
We're sort of cracked open.
I ended up using ministry and faith to begin my healing. And then the faith and ministry ended up becoming part of the traumatization. There's just a lot of boundary struggles, I think, in ministry positions. There's no necessarily regulatory oversight over people who do ministry with traumatized clients. This particular person basically treated me like her daughter and called me her spiritual daughter. And in my naivety, I thought that she was aware of how my parents had really not met my needs and was trying to make up for it. That was my naive belief that, oh, she knows and she's doing this on purpose for a therapeutic reason. But in the end, I think it became too inconvenient for her to continue referring to me that way. And eventually things just kind of broke down between us. So I would see this person maybe once a month because that is all she had available for 3 and 4 hours at a time. We would do sessions. And I mean, I would call it parts work at this point, what we were doing, but with a religious twist. And so she would talk to, and she's probably the person that kind of helped me understand what was happening because no one else really had any resources for me. And so I think what I'm trying to do is explain why I was using a faith-based ministry instead of just going to a therapist. Lack of money, and they were the only ones who seemed to understand what was going on with me at the time. And they were the only ones who seemed like they knew what to do with me. So that's why I got started in that, and that's why I continued in that. So at the same time, when I started having all these intense flashbacks, my physical health just went down the toilet. I think everybody's familiar with somatic experiences, and I think my body was just going haywire, trying to contain the things that were spilling out in my mind and emotions, and my body was just kind of going haywire. I don't think my body was re-experiencing, at least not outside of the flashbacks. I think it was just trying to find some kind of footing. So, I mean, I went to doctors for sinus infections that would not clear up. They were antibiotic resistant. I had mono at one point and continued to work my job because I didn't know. And I just thought, at the time I thought, well, I'm just being lazy. So with all of those medical appointments and copays and missing work, I used up all my FMLA time and ended up having to resign from my position because I couldn't work. I wasn't sure why, but I just knew that physically I was too sick to work, and doctors couldn't figure it out either. So I was like, well, okay, I guess I'm a medical mystery too, as well as a psychological one. Great. At least it matches. I joined a group that I had heard of through a friend that was also a religious group, but they called themselves an intentional community. And I know some people have heard of that. And for people who have not heard of that, is people who choose to live together in some communal way, like they might share a piece of land, they might live in the same household together. They usually share expenses, and it's a way of living life, but in a group so that you share the expenses and pressures and also the joys and satisfaction of just handling life together. But for them, it was based on a religion. I don't know what a community would be like if it was not based around a conservative religion, but I didn't know when I first moved there that they also did not believe in mental health problems.
Oh boy.
Yeah. Mental health problems to this group were either sin.
Or spiritual problems.
Yeah. Or lack of faith, or they often like to say, you're thinking about yourself too much. So in their mind, if you just do the disciplines, pray, read the Bible, serve other people, and don't think about yourself, that is what brings you joy and happiness. And there may be some truth to that, but I think that for people with trauma history, you kind of have to go back and resolve a lot of that before any of the rest of it is possible. So it's kind of putting the cart before the horse, I think, a little bit. But it was very soon apparent that I was not the right kind of person for them. And I actually left and returned about 4 times, I think, in the space of 6 years. A couple of times I was kicked out for having mental health struggles. Christians. At one point, I also requested to go on a trip, which I had the money for. I wasn't asking them to pay for it, to see a lady at the other end of the state who claimed to be a specialist in DID. She said that she could integrate people in 3 days.
So at this point, you knew enough that trauma was the main culprit.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you know that you probably had DID? Were you aware of that diagnosis at this point?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So I did receive a diagnosis at that time, but it was mainly from me doing my own reading from the library. And we didn't have, most people did not have 24/7 internet access at that point. So you had to go places to find information. But I had concluded on my own, as much as I hate this is probably what's going on, because it was the only thing that made everything else in my life make sense. Things that my mom had said about me when I was a kid, like she would always talk about how she could follow my trail, she would say. And some of that's probably ADHD, but I think I was switching a lot at home and probably not aware of it. So one inside part will get out a puzzle and start working the puzzle, and then you switch, and one person wants to ride a bike and leaves the bike in the driveway. And I think that probably some switching was going on, and it just made everything else make sense. I did not want that to be the diagnosis, but it made everything make sense. I'm not really the kind of person to live in denial for super long, so I'd rather just meet things head on and go, okay, well, if this is what it is, then I've got to figure out what to do. So working with the minister helped me understand, okay, this is what's going on. Because I could not stay in my home, because I couldn't work, I ended up moving to the intentional community, not knowing that they had the views about mental health that they did. But by the time I moved there, I did know I have parts. In some ways, I think because of how culty they were, it was fairly easy for them to convince me that, if you just do these things, you'll be as happy as we are. So it was very easy to go back to, okay, well, maybe this isn't real. Maybe it's just something wrong with me, and if I do what they're telling me to do, it will get the results that they're telling me it'll get. So I did try a lot. I tried very hard in that cult. I would call it a cult now. They call themselves an intentional community, or they did. My efforts were not successful at all. So I tried to join in. I tried to do the activities they did. They put on a show every fall that I tried to be part of. I tried to immerse myself in the life as much as possible, and it just couldn't work because I was switching all the time. I was in acute trauma time at that point, all the time.
I mean, I would imagine that cults and intentional communities self-select for people with mental health problems, because as your mind's pulling apart because of trauma or mental illness or whatever, the idea that you could be in a very scaffolded, supportive community, that maybe that would help kind of pull you together psychiatrically, psychologically. I don't know. It makes a lot of sense to me that you would have been drawn to that as a way to try to pull yourself together, integrate, stabilize.
Yeah, and this particular group was very strong with the bait and switch. And I participated once I was part of the group, and I just pushed down my feelings about it at the time, but they were really good at presenting themselves a certain way. But once you actually moved there and were with them all the time, they weren't that way. So it was very love bombing, kind of like a cult. It was very love bombing, sort of. I was there cumulatively for 6 years. Not one solid chunk of time, but I did ask permission to go see a specialist who was also a Christian, who said she could integrate people in 3 days, and they said no. The leaders of the group said, no, we don't think you need to do that. We think you just need to keep doing what we've been telling you and stop thinking about yourself and your problems so much. Being an Enneagram 8, I said, well, I'm sorry, but I'm going anyway. I don't think I was really
That's why
sorry
you reached
either.
out to me, because you're an 8.
Probably.
Eights are drawn to me.
So when I said, I'm going anyway, they said, okay, then don't come back. So I had to load all my stuff once again into the car that I had and try to figure out what I was going to do if this didn't work. I was just betting everything on the hope that it would work, and it did not work. My inside people, even though I did not have as much of a relationship with them then, they didn't like the lady, and I wish I could have paid more attention to that at that time. They really didn't like her. Rather than asking what felt like needed to happen, she tended to boss my system around, and they did not take real kindly to that. I don't boss them around, so they're not going to let some stranger boss them around. And so after like maybe a couple of hours on the first day, it was supposed to be a 3-day thing. She did take my money, but I didn't finish the 3 days. I was once again in a position where I have this crisis ongoing and no support and no one who even knows what this is or what to do with it. That is also when I leaned more heavily on the ministry, because they were the only people at that point saying, oh yeah, we know what this is and we know what to do. Mm-hmm. And
you weren't trying to go to psychiatry or psychology?
No, partially because the intentional community really had a lot of suspicion against just modern medicine in general, and psychiatry specifically. I was strongly discouraged from, and also talked out of, taking my meds when I was there, because I had to drive to a major city, which was a bit of a jaunt to get my meds. And so eventually they also talked me out of taking meds. I think I was on meds for ADHD at the time, and probably depression. And so stopped taking the meds, just really crashed and spiraled. I was switching all the time. I don't have very many cohesive memories of the intentional community because I was such a mess. I was just such a mess. I was switching all of the time. Inside parts were trying to harm me all the time. I just don't have a lot of cohesive knowledge of what happened during that time period. I do have people that will I had someone fill me in on their perspective, someone who lived with me at the time, and it was eye-opening. Because my problems were not solvable by the intentional community, eventually we just came to an impasse. I had started seeing this ministry lady secretly at first, even though she was also a Christian. I mean, I'm not sure what the deal was with Christians not wanting Christians to help people. I got to the point where I was seeing this lady, and at one point I was assaulted while I was out to see this lady, because I had to go to the closest major city. And I'm not 100% clear on what happened, but I know that things like Freemasonry are multi-generational, and even though maybe the original perpetrators are not around anymore, they tend to pass information and, I guess, intel to, they pass it down. This is my best understanding, is that someone saw me when I was in the inner city of this place, when I was meeting with this lady, and reported to someone. So now they knew where I was. And I'm not talking about the intentional community. Mm-hmm. I'm talking about the original group of people that were abusing me when I was a child. Mm-hmm. Because I did not want to call the police, I was adamantly against involving the police. The cult kicked me out for a final time. And it was a little bit of a kick out / I'm leaving. I told them I would leave because when I got back from being assaulted, they said, well, if you hadn't been doing these things, the typical well, if you weren't thinking about yourself and your problems again, you wouldn't have been in that situation. So I just at that point said, that's the line for me. So I told them that I would leave. I would need a few weeks to figure out what I was doing, where I was going. So I did move back to the city where the lady lived that was helping me. And, it feels like I thought that moving there would be what I needed to do. And when I look back, it feels like I was jumping out of the frying pan and into the fire, because I moved back and the people from the original perpetrator group started visiting my apartment. So, and I had a child at that point. I had, my oldest was, I think, 5. And this was like 10 years ago, I think. People were coming in my apartment at night. And it took me a while to put together what was happening, but after a little bit, I was able to piece together. And with the help of the ministry lady, she was telling me, I think people are still abusing you.
Mm-hmm. And this was able to happen because you were in dissociated other parts.
Yes.
When you would be assaulted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Other parts would open the door because they were afraid they would be punished later worse if they didn't. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know those parts, so I couldn't just go tell them, hey, this is not going to happen anymore. They didn't know better. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I guess in some ways they were trying to do the right thing with the information they had. But I was being trafficked on weekends especially, sometimes weeknights, but mostly weekends. Mm-hmm. People would come in to my apartment, and a lot of times I was dissociated into another part, and then I would come back after they'd leave, and I'd have to deal with, like, if I'm hurt, if I'm bleeding, if I'm...
You wouldn't know why?
No. I mean, I'd have my suspicions. Yeah.
That sounds horrifying. It sounds like some kind of crazy science fiction movie, mm-hmm. almost, that you're having amnestic episodes where parts of you, terrible things are happening, and the other parts are waking up and realizing, wait, something terrible's happening. And
mm-hmm.
yet you were just cycling through that for...
Probably 6 months to a year. Wow. And I would have parts that, usually the ones that would open the door, they were the ones who were experiencing what was happening. Those parts were the ones that were being raped. And those parts were the ones that were being threatened. There came a point, because I was working toward this point, where I had some co-consciousness with those parts. And that was also, not to be too dramatic, but it was torture. Because it's kind of like if you're sitting in a car, in the passenger seat, you can see out the windshield, but you're not driving the car. So you can see what's happening, but you have no control over it. So that was a very, very dark time for me, because mm-hmm. I could see what was going on. There was nothing I could do about it. And I was starting to form relationships with these parts. So I was caring about them. And I also think just, human to human, you would care about someone, even if you didn't know them. If you saw that they were being put through what I was going through, I think anyone would feel care toward them.
Yeah, it's like a horrifying ride or merry-go-round that you just can't get off. It just keeps coming around and around, and you're putting together, this is happening. You're getting mm-hmm. reassaulted, and you can't figure out a way to get off this.
Mm-hmm. And I also couldn't tell anyone, because my minister told me directly. So we had this sort of silent agreement.
This is she, right?
Yes.
She knew what was happening?
She knew what was happening, but we never formally acknowledged it, because she told me, if you formally tell me that you're being assaulted, I have to call the police, and they will take your child away from you. She said, if you're not safe in your home, then neither is your child. So I have to report.
How do you break out of that horrific loop?
It took a very long time. I had to move away. And I mean, besides the fact that there's a lot of expense and stress involved in moving with a small child, there was also the trauma piece, and trying to figure out how do you get up after a night like that and just get your work clothes on and go to work? That's what I had to do.
I can't imagine.
And at one point, my hair, which was almost to my waist, I think at that point, at one point when an inside person decided that they were going to break the law of silence, which is one of those things that abusers tell you, if you tell, here's all the things that are going to happen. One of my inside parts very bravely decided she was going to take a risk and talk. They cut my hair. So that night, someone came in my house and cut my hair to my chin. Because I think in some cultures that's shaming, I guess. And it was definitely disconcerting for me also to make that big of a change and to have people at work go, oh, you cut your hair. Why'd you do that? And I didn't do that. I couldn't even explain how my hair was all of a sudden up to my chin, honestly, to them. Yeah. So I had to kind of laugh it off and say, make up whatever you make up.
It's almost like every night you're getting a date rape drug, like which causes amnesia. Like, so you're going into these periods where you have enough awareness to know that terrible things are happening, but you can't quite pull them up. But there's evidence day after day after day that you are being terribly abused, and yet you can't figure out how to get out.
Yeah. And I mean, even though I didn't always have direct knowledge of the details, I was still in my body. I mean, women know when they've been raped. They know. You feel things physically. So I knew. And at one point, I had worked hard enough to heal that I was able to actually be there. I couldn't stop them from opening the door. And once I was able to be there, all they really had to say was, "Oh, should we go wake up your child?" If I didn't want to do something that they wanted me to do. So in order to protect my child, I immediately complied. I think any mother would. And I mean, luckily my child doesn't have trauma from that time period because they were asleep when all this was going on. And that's really all I wanted at that time. I didn't feel it was best for them to be taken away from me and put in foster care. We've all heard horror stories. So the best thing I could work out at the time was to just keep trying to heal, and protect my kid. If I have to put my body between me and my kid, then so be it. And it was absolutely horrific. And yes, I would do it again if it meant protecting my child. And my child doesn't know. They're 15. And I told them when I came to do this podcast, could you please wait a few years before you listen to it? Because I don't want that kind of pressure on them. You know, like I would imagine knowing that someone did something to keep you safe would make you feel indebted. And I don't want them to feel that way. I'm their mother. That is my job.
So how does that end? I mean, you're sitting here today. She said it's 15 years later. She's grown up into a teenager. Like, how did you escape that?
I moved away. And at first I moved to a very small town outside of that major city. And that was enough for a while. One thing that happened from the trafficking, and this is also something I've never told anyone out loud before, traffickers and people who participate in those kinds of things, they're very power hungry. They like to exert their power, and they like to make sure that you know how much power they have. So there was a lot of instances where I was pretty sure I had gotten pregnant and lost the baby. At one point, my relationship with this ministry lady was starting to kind of break down. And because her availability was so sparse, I took what she taught me in the sessions and would do it kind of with my own self and my parts at night when I could. In October of 2016, I already knew, but I took a pregnancy test. It was positive. And I was determined not to lose this baby. But once I told her, because pregnancy, even if I didn't tell her, it's going to become obvious at some point. When I told her, I think for her, that was her like, okay, this is really real and we can't deny anymore that this is really real. And she started to pull away. It could be coincidental. I know now that there were a lot of other things going on in her life at that time, but it felt personal. And in my determination to save this baby, I moved away. And once we moved away, we were safe for the most part. When I was 39, the stalking started happening again, so I moved out of state. And that effectively ended all contact with any kind of perpetrators, any kind of connection that may have existed between the people in that state and whatever group they had come from. And during that time, I started offering peer support in 2018. I started doing what I had learned to do with this woman, with my own system, and realized after a little while that there really doesn't have to be a religious component to this. And a lot of it was it feels like very basic mental health things. Like, even though I have more personas to try to work with, it's still very basic, like find out what happened, witness, have compassion, see what kind of support they might be needing, offer it if possible, and find out what they want to do in the future. It may not be that simple all the time, but that is like in a nutshell what I had learned to do. You have to unconditionally accept every part, which kind of threw me for a minute, but once I understood it, it made sense. So I was learning from her, and I mean, I look back and I'm grateful. I learned from her how to offer each part of me unconditional love and acceptance. And that is really the only thing that ever moved the dial for me, ever, for anything. Starting there and going, doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, what you think, who you know, I love you. Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit hippie-ish, like love makes, love is enough, or, all the things that people say. And I mean, yes and no. Yeah. But you have to start there. At least I did. I had to start there. So I had started developing friendships and relationships with my inside parts, and things were starting to come together. I mean, nothing ever happens quickly. You'd make little shifts here and there, and over time, they result in a big shift. So I was friends with my parts. We were functioning okay. I think I still probably had mostly trauma, like relational trauma from the lady that I had had the relationship with. I think I had processed probably the bulk of my little kid abuse trauma at that point. So I started offering peer support to other people because in my attempt to find a therapist or somebody who knew what to do with what was going on with me, I had come up empty. And even in the case where I had been looking for therapists, just like hoping that if I could find one, I'd somehow be able to come up with the money to see them, I couldn't find someone that even knew enough about dissociation or even, like, to be honest, sexual trauma. I couldn't find someone. The only two people that were near me at the time that I could have seen, logistically, it wasn't possible. I was working 40 hours a week. My boss kindly let me come in early so that I could leave early one day of the month so that I could go see someone. And the people that were there, I think it was like an hour and a half one way. And then I was working against the clock because I had to be back to pick up my kid from daycare. So I wouldn't have been able to do it. There was just no way that I could do it. So just realizing how sparse the resources are for people like me, I was like, well, I'm not a therapist and I can't do therapy, but I can offer compassion. I can offer space. I can give them my capacity.
And wisdom and expertise.
Yeah, I can get to know them in their parts if their parts are willing. And maybe some things that have helped me might help them. I'm not assuming that they will because everyone's different, but I can offer that.
Yeah. Before we dive into the peer support thing, I wonder if you might just talk a little bit about where you are today with the DID, with your parts. Like, is there one part that predominates that's sort of, I don't know, the head part or the captain part, and then the others are sort of secondary? Or where is your system now, as we sit here today?
My system and I are on very good terms. They make me smile. I have friendships with the main ones. There's some that are more in the background, and I do know them and love them. They just aren't as active. I'm the volunteer. I volunteered as tribute. And also just like in having children, there's usually a common theme in any system that everybody can agree on no matter what. And my system is very adamant that no child will be hurt in our presence if we have anything to do with it. So understanding that like children need a consistent mother, everybody kind of decided together that I would be the mom. So until my little kids are way older and can understand more, I'm front and center.
You mean little kids, the other parts?
No, I mean my outside children.
Oh, your outside, okay.
Yeah, so I had the baby and then I had my firstborn.
Okay. Now, since there are parts of you that are not only accustomed to being abused, traumatized, like they even, they just acquiesced. And I mean, does that mean that you are, I don't know, at much higher risk of being assaulted in the future? Because again, there are parts of you who could be invited right into a traumatizing situation and would just step right in like, oh, we know this. We are very comfortable with this. Or have there been fundamental shifts in those traumatized parts that they're no longer vulnerable to that?
I don't know that I could speak for all of them, but I think the majority of them, through their relationship with me and then through the experiences that I've been able to provide for them since then, I think all of them have sort of come to understand that those things should never have happened to them. And the experiences that I give them now is what life is supposed to be. So I don't think that they would be extremely vulnerable because they've experienced so much of the good life now that I don't think that they would be willing to go back to any of that. Like, even if invited or manipulated or forced, I just don't think they would.
Yeah. Would you say now, today, as of 2025, do you have dissociative identity disorder, or is it in what we call remission? Or
That's an interesting question. I didn't know remission was a word that was applied to DID.
Well, I've never thought of that. I mean, I have so many questions about DID for you, but
Yeah.
it's sounding like it was taking over your life and ruining your life and allowing you to be in situations where you were just being traumatized over and over and over and you couldn't break out of that. Yet now you are working professionally to help other people with DID. You know, you are telling your story. You came all the way out here to do this. I mean, it's seeming like, again, I'm not doing a psychiatric evaluation on you, but it seems like maybe your DID's in a type of remission. I mean, how do you think about that?
I don't know if remission really resonates with me, but because of the agreements that me and my system have made, I am usually the one who is front and center most of the time. Maybe if I'm at home and like it's a low stress situation or something and the kids aren't around, maybe my other parts would love to, you know, they're able to peak. Like, I don't know if they, I don't know how much they absorb because it's pretty much individualized up to them, but they like to watch. They like to watch from the inside as I do life. And I kind of just tell people I don't function as a multiple right now, but they're all still there. Mm-hmm. They're enjoying the ride at this point.
Okay. I think of DID as, well, it's interesting. I think of it as primarily female, and I think of it as primarily related to childhood sexual abuse. I mean, does that resonate with you?
From my clients, yes. Mm-hmm. There is some debate about whether DID, I don't know if I would even call it DID, but there's some debate about origins of part systems. There are people who have systems who do not identify as the system being caused by trauma. Mm-hmm. Those people don't usually seek out my help, so I don't, they're not usually in distress. Mm-hmm. So they don't usually seek out my help. I'd be happy to help them if they needed something, but primarily my clients are traumagenic, which is what they call systems that originate from trauma as a result of trauma.
Yeah. Now, you and I talked about this on the phone before you came out, but this idea that in psychiatry in 2025, DID is actually, I don't know if controversial is even the right word. It's like, there's maybe two very different camps. Mm-hmm. One camp is that DID is definitely real. It's a dissociative disorder, but that the alters part of it is more of like an iatrogenic sort of Western medical created thing. Mm-hmm. And then I think there's another crew that would say that DID is really just complex PTSD and doesn't really merit its own category. But I'm curious what you would say about that. When people, because this is the thing you hear in psychiatry, like, is DID real? Mm-hmm. Like, is this actually a real thing as defined by the DSM?
Yeah. Well, I think that's why I was so excited to talk to you, because I was excited to talk to you anyway. And then you said, well, I'm a little bit of a skeptic. And I'm like, perfect. I could not have set this up better if I tried. I don't know if, so many things in life can't be proven scientifically. So like, I was kind of, joking with you before I came about, well, like, I don't believe in the male gender, just to make the point that so many things are constructs that the only reason it exists is because we all agree it does. Mm-hmm. I tend to think that everyone has parts, trauma or no trauma. That's just my opinion. I feel like the diagnosis should be amnesic barriers.
I like that.
That's what I feel should be the diagnosis. Yeah. Possibly an excessive number of parts. But I feel like we don't know enough about it to be able to make those statements yet. And I don't know if we ever will, because it's not like you can just like open your skull and look at what's there. Mm-hmm. So,
yeah, I guess to clarify my quote unquote skepticism, it's not that dissociation is not real, because gosh, in the podcast, we've had so many stories about dissociation, and I see that in my office every day.
Yeah.
But I wonder let me back up a little. DID used to be called multiple personality disorder. And so, this aspect of a DID that involves alters with very different personalities and physiologies and even like ways of speaking or moving or being, part of me wonders how much of that's cultural. Like, would you find that in Botswana or Japan or, Papua New Guinea?
Well, based on my clients, yes.
Yeah.
I've had a client from Japan. I currently have one from Germany. I've had one from Belgium. I've had one from India. I don't know how folks find me, but I think I would tentatively say yes, you would.
Okay, that's fascinating. I'm wondering, Jade, how you might think about this. So in my practice, I see a lot of complex PTSD.
Yeah.
And a ton of people with dissociative amnesia who will say that, only later in life were they really able to fully or partially recover what happened to them. And they realize that they spent significant parts of their childhood and or adult life in a dissociated state to kind of protect themselves.
Yeah.
And so we've had a bunch of stories on the podcast of people like that. But the kind of DID that used to be multiple personality disorder, so more what you have struggled with, that seems to be, well, it's interesting. It seems to be rare. Right before you came over today, I looked up, it's quoted as about 1% prevalence in the U.S. So that's 1% is, 3.5 million people. That's a lot of people. But in my practice, do I see anybody who describes having alters? No. So I have some thoughts on that. On the podcast that we've had, I think one other. So it's interesting. I think most psychiatrists would say that DID in terms of like discrete alters and discrete personalities is actually extremely rare. Again, you Google it, you get 1% prevalence. And I know you and I have talked on the phone a few times and you said, it's not rare. So what are your thoughts on that about, what I'm not seeing in my office and what you're seeing in your work?
Yeah. I have several thoughts and they're all very different. Alters aren't stupid. If they don't think that you're going to be the type of person that they can show themselves to, they're not going to. And on the flip side, sometimes they are so discreet that they probably did talk to you and you didn't know that. When you work with people like that day in and day out, I'm pretty good at seeing it, but even I don't always catch it. I mean, mostly because I'm not necessarily out to catch it. But sometimes I will see someone shift a little and go, it's a little one. And they're not aware of it. And they shift into the adult self again, and so I think partially maybe they don't because they're not sure if you're trustworthy. No offense. Part of it may be because they were there and you just didn't see it because you didn't know what you were looking for.
Yeah, that's fair.
Also, no offense.
You're not offending me. No, I have all sorts of blind spots. I mean, I've talked about those at length on the podcast, and I would not be surprised at all if there are people with really significant DID who I've seen as having complex PTSD with dissociative periods, but that I completely missed this. I'm sure that's true.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably highly likely. And I also I'm not a researcher and I'm not a statistician, but when I look at how many, like if you compare the prevalence of DID with the statistics on how many people have said when interviewed that they've had 4 or more adverse childhood experiences, those numbers don't add up. And the likelihood that someone has some kind of dissociative disorder, if they've had 4 or more, is extremely high. So I'm not really sure how to interpret that discrepancy, but I have not had the experience of DID being rare. I mean, and again, it could just be another example of like, you see what you look for.
Yeah. Right. You are a DID specialist. You are a DID peer counselor.
Yeah.
What do you think is, again, I want to get more into your peer counseling work in a minute. What do you think we in psychiatry misunderstand or just miss about DID?
Well, I think everyone's so fascinated by the idea of parts that they're so focused on the parts that they don't understand what the actual problem is. And the parts aren't the problem. I think a lot of times people think, well, if a person has parts, then the solution is to figure out how to make the parts go away. But do you want the person's self to go away? Because that's kind of what you're saying. And so I feel like what people misunderstand or get wrong a lot is that the trauma is what is the problem. The way that it manifests is what it is.
Yeah.
And you have to
That's
actually...
the way the body adapted or coped.
Yeah,
right?
that's
the
how
way
the
the
mind
psyche
worked.
healed. It kind of healed into these parts to sort of handle what was not manageable before.
And it really doesn't seem like, the more I thought about it, it really doesn't seem that outlandish to me, because like, I remember all the way back in high school being shown a video in biology where if you take two heart cells and separate them, they'll beat at their own rhythm. If you take them and put them back together, they'll synchronize. So it seems to me like if a heart can do that, surely a brain can do that too. So like, and I'm not even saying that as a nod to integration. I don't have like a certain solution that I feel is the best or only. But I feel like if this can happen in so many other ways with both bodies and nature, I mean, there's so many things in nature that are both a collection of parts and the thing. The parts are also the thing, and the thing is the thing. So I feel like having a person made up of parts isn't really that unusual. I mean, I don't think the concept is that unusual. I just think people haven't been socialized to think that it's normal.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense why some people, let's say with terrible childhood sexual trauma, have more dissociative amnesia, so they go offline, they protect themselves with dissociation, but they don't necessarily, again, we all have parts, but they don't develop full-blown DID. And again, we've heard a lot from these people in the podcast. And then there's another group of people who have, let's say, again, serious childhood sexual abuse, who manifest with DID, with alters that are often very separate, that may be getting themselves into repeated trouble with kind of repetition compulsion, trauma bonding. And is it the severity of trauma? Is it something about the family system? Is it something about the person themselves? I know you've talked to a lot of people with DID. I mean, do you have a sense what predicts for the development of DID versus, more common sort of functional dissociative amnesia?
I think there's too many moving parts. I have clients that are very non-functional in the way that you're describing, who I would say are more on the OSDD end, and it seems like it's...
What's that stand for?
Otherwise specified dissociative disorder. And I think there's just too many moving parts. I think all of those things play into it, but I don't know that any one of them is like the thing that determines. But what I have observed is, again, I know I'm not qualified to diagnose, but in my opinion, I've never met a DID system that did not also have an attachment disorder. I think attachment plays into it way more than people have maybe understood or recognized before. Because if you do not have a safe, consistent attachment, I think the risk goes up way more to dissociate and possibly even start to form parts. Because you have no anchor to reality or safety or comfort or anything.
Let's talk a little bit about your peer support work. What do you think your peers are most needing? So if someone reaches out to you to get DID peer support, what kind of support exactly is most important for them, at least in the initial stages?
It's really all over the map, to be honest. There's some people who come to me and are like immediately trauma dumping because they've just held it in for so long. And I mean, I don't mind because I have capacity. They've held it in for so long and they haven't had anyone with capacity or like willingness to witness their story and just stay present with them and not, either become triggered or, the things that people do to avoid being uncomfortable. Sometimes they need practical, like, okay, my parts just can't stop fighting. What do I do? Sometimes they need more practical, and it's like, okay, well, this is basically conflict resolution on a group scale. And so we can sort of move forward that way. Sometimes I can get their parts to talk directly to me and I can kind of find out, okay, this is why they're upset about this certain thing. But almost all parts have a very common goal, which is usually safety. Sometimes it's conflict resolution and sometimes it's immediate, like, I need to tell this to someone because it's killing me. So it's kind of all over the map, to be honest. But I think the appeal for me, as opposed to just a therapist, is I also know what the internal experience is like. So there are things they don't have to explain to me that they would have to go through the whole process to try to explain what they're talking about to a therapist who doesn't have that experience. In order to even talk about the problem, they have to explain so many things that it almost feels like daunting or not worth it.
Yeah, yeah. I would guess that if you look at a group of people with trauma, you could probably argue that people with full-blown DID have some of the worst trauma because it's so often, childhood sexual abuse. Mm-hmm. How do you take care of yourself? You are trying to be peer support for people who, again, often have really terrible, complex PTSD. Mm-hmm. And as you said, they're trauma dumping, they're opening up. You might be the first person that they've really shared with what's happened to them. Like, how do you manage hearing all of that? And particularly knowing that what you've been through and that there's parts of you that have been through equally horrible stuff. Mm. I mean, how do you manage that?
Well, I would say sometimes compartmentalization comes in handy. I'm really good at leaving my work in the office. I try to be completely, as much as I can, present and compassionate with people. And then when the call's over, the call's over. And sometimes it's just real life is going to come busting in, whether you want it to or not. Like when you have kids, you've got to go and, be mom. But for some reason, I just have very deep capacity and am able to separate it from my everyday life. I'm not really sure exactly how. Wish I could give you a reason or way, but it's just something that comes naturally, I guess. Mm-hmm. And I don't feel like it's trauma I'm holding somewhere that I need to release. It just feels like, okay, I'm going to hold this with you right now. But when we both leave, I'm putting it back down. Yeah. Because I don't need to carry it with me after this. Yeah.
Well, Jade, this has been super interesting and illuminating. I'm so glad that you came out here to do this.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. I wonder if there's one last topic or thing maybe that we didn't get to address that you want to make sure that listeners hear. Mm-hmm. Again, this is the first time we've really explored DID in 7 seasons of Back from the Abyss. So
yeah, well, maybe it'll just be the first of a few, I hope.
Yeah.
So one thing that I want to just briefly say, I understand the thought that maybe parts are co-created with well-meaning support people. I've never personally met a therapist who knew enough about DID to induce it in someone else. And I mean, I obviously don't know every therapist, but in 7 years, and I don't think I even have the number. I had the number at some point of how many people I've actually interacted with. I've never heard of a therapist that knows enough about it to somehow accidentally, well-meaningly force it. And most of the time, the people that come to me are like, I can't find anyone who knows anything about this. So I'm not really sure. I mean, it sounds logical. I don't think that would actually play out in real life because if you know enough about DID to induce it in someone, you know how to help them. So you don't really need to. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is I think that a lot of therapists who are new to multiplicity, they don't know any better. They have been taught that integration is like the holy grail of healing for DID. And for some people that makes sense, and for other people it does not. And I feel like my idea of integration is kind of tomato anyway, because to me, for me, and I also think there's a lot of misunderstanding among people with parts of what integration is. But I think for me, integration is all parts are out all the time. And that sounds kind of strange because I'm not acting like one way this way, one way in 1 minute and one way in a different minute. That's not what I mean. I mean, all parts are aware of what's going on in life, and they're able to either interact or not interact as they want or need. And I feel like I don't know if that meets the clinical definition of integration. To me, that leans more toward functional multiplicity. I don't think integration is the ultimate answer all the time. And so I would just caution anyone who's, new to the topic or maybe new to having clients, I would really encourage them to work with the client on what they want. Because also another thing that can be re-traumatizing in psychiatry is having someone come in and tell you this is what you need to do and this is what you have to do. And this is what makes you acceptable or normal or whatever. Mm-hmm. And if they can't do that, then they feel like they're failures. Yeah. And I don't really think it's necessary for this clinical idea of integration to be forced on people in order for them to have happy and meaningful lives.
Yeah, I love that you ended with that because I think so often in psychiatry or medicine in general or therapy that we have goals. We have a sense this is what you need to do. This is what needs mm-hmm. to happen. You need integration. You need whatever versus just meeting the patient or client where he or she is. Like, what do you want?
Yeah.
And integration is such a hot button word now. Who doesn't want to have integration? But I love that point you made that may not exactly be what the person wants or needs. And I think what you described earlier is more thinking of a system of parts that live with respect and peace and compassion and acceptance. Like, we're all here.
Yeah.
So why can't we get along?
And I think that's what people who don't identify as having a dissociative disorder do naturally. Yeah. They may have less parts, but I feel like that's how they're living. And I mean, we all have the experience of seeing someone in a very different context and trying to reconcile what you're seeing with how you used to know them. And I think everyone does that. We're just not socialized to notice. So I don't think integration is necessarily like the answer. It could be. There may be people that want that, but I start off asking people what they want.
Love is the answer.
Love is the answer.
Thank you so much, Jade.
Thank you for having me.
Psychiatry is complicated. We have all these models and theories to try to explain the psyche and the brain. And yet we keep running into the reality that we don't actually fully know what we're talking about. When we talk about parts, is this metaphor or reality? And speaking of parts, are we talking transferential lenses and templates? Or are we talking about discrete personality states? Or are we talking firefighters and exiles? My sense is that all of this represents our attempts to put words to some of the deepest mysteries of existence and consciousness. And I think that's still probably a worthwhile endeavor, as impossible as it all may seem to be. We'll be back in 2 weeks. We always love to hear your comments and suggestions. You can reach out to me through my website, craigheacockmd.com.